when we're engaging in discourse about what is this thing, the bureaucratization of our planet, these projects of citizen management, the control of free speech, the amplification of war, the justification of war, the sort of deracinated, untethered, reasonless pursuit of war that doesn't make sense, like the humanitarian argument doesn't make sense in any context. It can't be humanitarianism. If that principle was applied elsewhere, you wouldn't get the same results. They can't be there just to protect the people of Ukraine, for example, because you would look at other conflicts and see how the same principles and arguments aren't being mapped onto them. So it can't be that principle. And again, this is superficial analysis, but I'd love to hear your response to it. Is when I'm trying to understand the threat that I believe that we face, a threat that you've been describing and pointing towards for almost all of your public life, I see as harbingers and great harbingers and foreshadowing of these challenges in the first, obviously, in the writing of George Orwell, still obviously, but less so in the writing of Aldous Huxley, you know, when we're talking about this sort of golden calf, the sort of hedonism, the soma, the sort of the banalization, the desacralization, the ease, the beautiful design, this, you know, the sort of like this sort of like, you know, Steve Jobs Apple world of sort of banal, anodyne, slick, sanitary imagery. And then adding to that, Kafka's sort of bizarre, kind of scratchy, allergic descriptions of bureaucracy that sort of stray into myth and straight into bureaucracies that are not easy to discern. And where has this power come from? What is causing this trial?
That's part of the degenerate patriarchal state, right? That's like the image of a headless giant, even. So, okay, so one of the things
I just wanted to put to you that trident, Huxley, Orwell, Kafka, as a kind of a description of these dystopia stroke utopias.
So one of the things that came to mind for me when you ran through those three things, I just rewatched Cabaret twice. Brilliant movie, 1970s. Absolutely brilliant movie. And it hasn't aged a bit. It's unbelievably well edited. Great music. It's really a masterpiece, Cabaret. And it unites those three themes. So you have this Whore of Babylon figure who is played by Liza Minnelli, and she's this sort of attractive, but not actually, as you get to know her, young woman who believes that she's freed herself entirely from the grip of the terrible patriarch, can pursue her sexual gratification as a autonomous individual, no matter what. And she's deluded in her narcissistic way into thinking that she's a major talent, and she plays a minor role as an entertainer in a cabaret, a gender-bending cabaret. It's very interesting, the cabaret, because many of the figures, including the band, are women, and they're seriously devoid of all sexual attraction. Like, they're dressed very provocatively, but they're presented on screen in a manner that's like animated corpses. It's really quite brutal. And the cabaret is gender bending and gender twisting, and it's reminiscent of the degenerate Weimar Republic, and everything's okay and everything's hedonistic, and this terrible catastrophe is playing out in the life of this woman. Well, the celebration of hedonism has taken on place. So that's on stage. So that's the hedonistic element. Everything goes. Everything's up in the air for sophisticated people to pursue their pleasure. Okay, the cabaret is run by this guy who's played by Joel Grey, who's the evil, he's the evil master of affairs, right? He's the intermediary between scenes. He's the psychopomp, and he's an evil clown. He's got that Kafkaesque element to him. He's the thing that's operating behind the scenes to shift us from place to place. And at the same time, all this hedonistic catastrophe is taking place in the Weimar Republic with all this gender bending and all this free sex. The Nazis are multiplying in the audience, and this Joel Grey figure, he's played so brilliantly. I think he won an Academy Award for it. It's really something. He's celebrating the hedonism and the expression of freedom and creative expression that goes along with it, that's, seduced this dim-witted, personality-disordered young woman. And at the same time, he's thrilled right to his bloody core that the Nazis are in the audience. So you get this weird dance between this structureless hedonism and the calling out from the depths of the despair that's in that hedonism for the most brutal possible of patriarchal forces. And then there's something even worse that's lurking underneath all that, which is positive delight in the spectacle that's taking place as sexuality deteriorates and pathologizes, and as the heavy hand of the state arises, because it's, what is it? It's a parody of hedonism, it's a parody of masculine power, and it's something that's devoted to inviting in exactly what the bloody Nazis produced. It's brilliant, and it's so relevant to what's happening in our society now, because you see this kind of hedonistic golden calf worship that we already walked through. And you said that was lacking something. Well, it's certainly lacking the heavy-handed insistence that some globalizing, centralizing force is necessary to bring order to an increasingly disordered state.
I think that you can only bring those about with successive, percussive, incessant crises. I think you can only legitimize this centralizing authoritarianism that's likely what's being teed up by the hedonism if you continually induce crises. And we've lived in...
Tyrants rule using force and fear. That's how you can tell they're tyrants. It's like, do this or else, tyrant. Do this or something terrible will happen. It's like, well,
it's
tyrant.
Bizarre to see the tyrant emerge cloaked in the language and even the apparel appurtenances of the bureaucrat in my country. Keir Starmer would struggle to be a more tedious and managerial individual, and yet his rhetoric post the riots in my country was that of the tyrant. There will be serious consequences. Mark my words, we will find them. Now, of course, superficially, he's talking about perpetrators of the most sort of awful disruption and sort of arson and people that put lives at risk. But actually, some of the arrests that are taking place are people that sort of said stuff on Facebook. Rumble make these snacks, you see. This is a brand called Positive. It's a pet food brand that Rumble have. But also they have a pet insurance that is an affiliate to it. You know, like dogs can go from very high energy to being sick in an instant. And you know, it's like if you have to call a vet, like when they're out of hours. It's a terrible way to manage your dog's health. Not to mention it can be very stressful for you. So there's this emergency pet kit that you can get from Positive Health, which contains critical medications and supplies that can keep you out of vets and maybe even save your dog's life. So if you want to use it, go to Positive, that's spelled like P-A-W, positive.com/brand. That's Positive, P-A-W-S, itive.com/brand, and get your pet emergency kit that's got critical meds in it like activated charcoal and styptic powder, and you can get 15% off using the code BRAND today. Go to positive.com/brand and use the code BRAND to get 15% off. I like these Rumble connected organizations because they've been so supportive. Good boy. So supportive to our channel. It's great to give a little bit back. There it is. Now, to your point about the sort of cabaret, I think the sort of the more commonly accepted analysis of that film is that it was almost a haven of like hedonism and celebration, kind of life and play amidst the authoritarianism.
The only person who accepts that analysis fundamentally in the film is the Liza Minnelli character, and her life is demolished by her participation. In fact, she sacrifices her future. She falls in love with a young man who's also perverted by the Weimar Republic, and she ends up pregnant, and she could escape from what she knows to be her certain dismal death. She sings a song at the end, basically stating to the audience, extremely powerful performance. It's really quite remarkable, about how she's going to certainly die the death of a drug-addicted prostitute, and that she's chosen that voluntarily as an alternative to falling in love with this young man who was a good young man and having the child that she aborted as a consequence of her hedonism.
She's the golden brutal top of the beast that's getting sacrificed as patriarchy emerges. But where we are now, say, I'm wondering if we're sort of part of the global cabaret. I was struck by, as obviously everybody was, the sort of Olympic opening ceremony, because I struggled to think of an event that was the expression of a power that was untethered from a national ideology. When we've seen, the Soviet Union aren't participating because of the Cold War, or when we've seen sort of the rather noble Black Panther power salutes at the Olympics, this sort of is ostensibly secular event, the Olympics, is peculiarly captured by a nihilistic festival. Now, sometimes I wonder this, Jordan, whether or not the people that are putting on the ceremony are deliberately sort of gleefully gleefully rubbing their hands and saying, we'll show those Christians or not, is actually secondary. Because in a sense, it's like the instantiation and expression of a will that's being an ulterior will that's winding its way through the annals of various individuals into the eventual ceremony that it becomes. And what is the point of that ceremony? What does it achieve? And what does it tell us?
Okay, so you have these systems of ideas that we described that are associated symbolically, right, by statistical regularity, let's say. Yes. And you can think of those as systems of things, right, or systems of objects or systems of material, but they're not. They're systems of ideas.
Yes.
Ideas are alive. Ideas are alive.
Yes.
Every idea has its aim. Every idea has its perception. Every idea has its motivations. Every idea is a personality. Every system of ideas is a personality. If you take, okay, so now imagine this. So imagine that you take 100 young women possessed by the woke ideology, okay? Now imagine they're all from middle-class families. Now you take one of those young women and you put her in a dinner party and you're talking to her and you find she's 90% decent young woman and 10% possessed by the woke ideology. And so as long as she's at the dinner, no problem. You put her together with 100 people like that, the whole goddamn devil's in the room. The whole thing is there. And that system of ideas, it has a will, it has a perception. You could say in some sense it has a mind of its own, even though it doesn't have a soul. And it's going to operate in the conspiratorial manner that constitutes the aim of that system of ideas. And it's going to use the individual actors who are its partial containers as its mechanism. This is why in Shakespeare, I can't remember the line, it's the line about the gods treating us for their sport, that we're pawns of the gods that are sacrificed to their pleasure. That's a good way of thinking about it. And the gods are these, in that sense, the gods that are being referred to are these systems of ideas that operate under the facade of things, that use individuals as their pawn. You see these things manifest themselves in very weird ways. So here's an example, 2 examples. There's a scene in The Joker, the first Joker with Heath Ledger, because the Joker's the evil clown like Joel Grey. Very, very interesting figure. Now, you remember that the Joker is the figure that can terrify the mafioso, right? So that's very interesting but the mafioso are organized criminals. They're not heretics. And so you can understand a mafioso. That's partly why they're popular fictional characters. They want what you want. They want your car. You can understand that. They might disagree about who should own it and why, but they want your car. And so really, they're a lot like you. The Joker, he gets half the money from his heist, and he burns it. So whatever the hell the Joker is, that's sufficient to terrify the criminals. Okay, now there's a scene just like that. Remember Pinocchio? Okay, so Pinocchio is brought to the island of the delinquents. That's Pleasure Island, where everyone's turned into a voiceless, braying slave, right? Brilliant. That movie's brilliant in its imagery. When the coachman who takes Pinocchio to the island, he reveals himself in a pub to the 2 criminals, the fox and the cat, that are trying to pervert Pinocchio in his path. When the coachman reveals his true identity to the fox and the cat, he turns red and is horned, and the cat jumps into the lap of the fox, and they're both terrified. And it's because, even though the criminals don't know it, there's a chaotic malevolent force underlying criminality itself that if you ever saw would terrify you even if your soul was already mostly black. And that's the Joker figure in the Batman series. And that's that figure of the coachman, even more archetypally portrayed in the Pinocchio story. And it's no different than Lucifer. It's no different than Satan. It's no different than Mephistopheles. It's the same. It's no different than Seth in the Egyptian cosmology.
Yes.
Right.
I like that.
And it's alive.
I got it. The thing that I like is the inference, the ambiguity might be more terrifying than malign intent. That malign intent operates within a polarity. It operates within a kind of order. It's identifiable. You can negotiate with it. You understand its
that'd
intention.
Be criminal intent. Yeah.
Our new The Oracle series, our first ever group interviews designed to bring the greatest and most authoritative voices in particular subjects together for the very first time. Robert Malone, Dr. Pierre Corey and Steve Kirsch.
What we've experienced is a globally deployed psychological bioterrorism playbook. It's well developed.
And then I started to see just global propaganda directed at essentially distorting, dismissing, and suppressing the evidence of efficacy. And I saw it as a crime.
And at that point, I knew that this was not just a coincidence. There were too many black swans over too short a period. I've never heard anything like this story in my life.
They seem to get the human psyche so well when it comes to brainwashing us and propagandizing us to the direction that they want us to go in, that you would think that they would know that pulling all of these various tactics would actually just push support towards Trump, not away from him.
Ryan Ruth, some of his posts even show that he appeared to have been working with, in his own words, the U.S. Embassy in Kiev. He's doing effectively military intelligence, human trafficking of terrorists.
It's in this context that I think Ruth was kind of radicalized. He decided that while he wanted to assassinate Putin, the easier thing would be to assassinate Donald Trump.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you want to see more uncensored content where free speech can flourish, join our live stream. Click the link right here to watch the next video if you want to, or become a member of a growing movement. Download the Rumble app and you'll be informed every time we make a new piece of content. Stay free.